This is certainly big news. A lot of questions that we want to ask you, but talk us through it, because stamp duty to land tax, the ups and downs are certainly, very interesting for buyers and sellers.
It was such a big announcement. We were expecting it, but it is good news for the property market. We do know that it does encourage transactions.
Tell us a little bit more about it, Nerida, because some people who've just forked out over the past few years enormous amounts of stamp duty are looking at this saying, what happened to me?
Yeah, I know. Look, definitely. Look, if you pay stamp duty, you won't have to pay it. You know, that's the big consideration. But from this point forward, or not this point forward, from about March, we will expect to see either stamp duty or a land tax system.
And will it be kind of like a two-tiered system, do you think, Nerida, in terms of, in the UK, for example, I believe they have that scenario. So if you're buying and selling with the land tax option, you have to buy into somewhere else that's had land tax? Is that how it works? Yeah, look, it just does depend. We don't quite know exactly what the system will be. So at this stage, it will be under community consultation till around March, and then from June it will go forward. So at this stage it's said you can pay stamp duty or you can pay land tax, but there will be a lot more announcements we think over coming months.
So just on the apartments, Nerida.
Yeah, so we are seeing very poor rental demand in apartment markets around Australia at the moment. So that is starting to flow through to values. It's not flowing through everywhere. We know in Melbourne CBD we are seeing the highest vacancy rate in Australia, but prices surprisingly are remaining pretty stable. If we go elsewhere though, Carlton, for example, we have seen a 22% price drop. We're also seeing places like Sydney Olympic Park and North Ryde, so areas where there has been lots of new development taking place, they are seeing quite significant declines. So it really does depend where you are. I mean, it's quite different to the housing market at the moment, where it is quite rare to find price declines. Markets have really rebounded very quickly.
And what about Australian luxury property? How's that going?
Yeah, this is fascinating. Yeah, look, it is quite fascinating to look at luxury property. I've got a write-up in the Weekend Australian this week on mansions and what we're seeing in the $10 million plus price category, that prices have gone particularly well in this price category, quite unusually on a global level. If we have a look elsewhere in Australia, around the world, we're seeing places like New York and London and Paris, Hong Kong are seeing quite significant price declines. So at the moment, if we look at that 10 million price category, lots and lots of search activity, some very strong price growth, and very different to what we're seeing in terms of lower cost apartments.
It's been bizarre, hasn't it, Nerida? It's been really extraordinary, because I suppose no one knew what was going to happen because it had been so unprecedented, and people were saying this property market could go down by 10 or 20%. To see it booming in so many areas has really flipped what a lot of the predictions were.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an enormous surprise. I mean, if you have a look at the early predictions that were made by some forecasters, they were considering a 30% price decline. I mean, even as 2 months ago, we were still seeing some predictions of a 10% price decline. I mean, all in all, in some markets, we haven't seen any price declines, and prices have actually gone better during the pandemic. But if we have a look at our big cities like Melbourne and Sydney, we do now have higher prices since March than what we were looking at, compared to now. So it is a very unusual occurrence, and does reflect the fact that we are in an unusual recession where we do have a lot of money and interest rates are very low and people are saving a lot of money, and a lot of the job loss has been highly concentrated amongst young people.
And it will be interesting to see the outcome of the announcement from the stamp duty to land tax in New South Wales. Do you think, just quickly, they will perhaps adopt that policy across the rest of the country?
Look, I don't think so. I mean, if you have a look in Victoria, they did make announcements about social housing. So I do think for the Victorian government that will be their big policy announcement next week when they reveal their budget. Elsewhere across Australia, I mean, we already do have a stamp duty arrangement in Canberra, so that's been operating for quite some time. I do think the New South Wales government is likely to look quite closely at Canberra to get some ideas as to what's happening. And then elsewhere, I think Queensland have said that they're not going to be looking at it, and the other states are fairly similar. So, New South Wales is, our biggest state, and it will be really interesting to see how it pans out. I think there's a lot of concern. I think, as you mentioned before, people that have paid enormous amounts of stamp duty, places like, if you bought in Mossman over the last few years, you could have been paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in stamp duty. Even the average home in Sydney does command around $40,000 worth of stamp duty. So people have already paid lots of money, and whether the government will move to getting people to pay land tax in the future remains to be seen. In Canberra, they've given a 20-year time period. So if you paid stamp duty, you don't need to pay it. You don't need to pay land tax for 20 years. So it will just be an interesting process over coming months as to how they decide to implement it.
Yeah, plenty of people will be hoping that they implement it in New South Wales if you paid a whole lot of stamp duty that you're not going to pay land tax. Nerida, look forward to the piece in the Weekend Australian. Always great to talk to you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Speak soon.